Hello, everybody. Welcome to Earthship Global's November webinar on visual storytelling in LCA with Tess Konovich, Earthship Global's data visualization specialist. Tess applies a combination of scientific knowledge and experience in art, design, and teaching to the development of data visualizations that uncover insights and convey essential findings to broad audiences. She conducted extensive laboratory, computational, and field work while earning BS degrees in biology and environmental science from La Salle University and has an MS in computational and integrative biology from Rutgers University, and she is a longtime artist and designer. Tess provides value-added support to Earthshift Global's sustainability consulting and clients and development of Earthshift Global software tools. Welcome, Tess. We're so happy to have you here. Please take it away.
I will.
Oh, but let me just say that also Karen Fleming will be asking your questions for you. If you put them in the Q&A during Tessa's talk, she'll ask them for you at the end. Thank you and welcome, Karen.
Alrighty, ready to go. Welcome and thank you all for joining and thank you for the introduction, Holly. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. There we go. So about me, thank you again, Holly, for the introduction. So my bachelor's, I have a very science-heavy background, and I'm the data visualization specialist at Earthshift Global. And so over the last 2 years, I've gotten to attend and speak at quite a few conferences. Attending, I've really gotten to hone in on my graphic design skills through the Adobe Creative Pro Week and some data storytelling conferences. And then I've actually gotten to speak at the LCA Institute and the most recent ACLCA conference. And we are actually going to start with my survey results. So if you attended ACLCA, you may remember, if you attended my talk specifically, you may remember that I asked a brief survey to kind of get an understanding of how everyone's visualizing things in our community and what I can add to my talks to add value. We're going to toggle from that to data visualization essentials. So from that survey, I learned one thing you guys want to see is a little more basic. So I dove into some more intensive visualizations. So today we're going to go back to the basics and talk about some essentials. My Microsoft Office tips and tricks was really popular, so I am bringing that back. One thing that was really in high demand was accessibility. So I've taken some time to really look at my experience and do some research on accessibility, and we have a big section on that. And then finally, the most highly rated portion of my previous talk was innovation and visualization. So we will end with that. So getting started. So at the ACLCA conference, I had a fairly large crowd, so I got a good idea of what everyone's primary role in people attending my talk. And so it varies from project manager to practitioners, researchers, etc. But one thing it seems that almost everyone has in common is they are visualizing their own data. So at Earthshift, I'm the in-house designer, so I get to help my analysts with visualizing their data, but it seems like most people don't have that. And so now you're all here, we're going to learn a little bit more about visualizing data. Again, most participants visualize their own data. So then I wanted to learn more about how you're visualizing your own data. So most people seem to have the Microsoft Office suite, right? So PowerPoints, Excels, documents. In terms of types of visualizations, bar, every time I've done a survey, bar has always been the most popular. It's the one I most use, and you'll be seeing a lot of renditions of bar charts in this presentation. And then who do you make your visuals for? Kind of varied. So in-house for your company, external for clients, the public, and those are the audiences that I also make visuals for. So I'm excited. I think it's gonna be really relevant. And then finally, I was interested in seeing how everyone visualizes their results. And unsurprising to me, Microsoft Office is where most people create their data visualizations. I am proficient in the Adobe suite. I used R for years in undergrad and grad school. I'm proficient in Tableau, and I know Python and MATLAB, although I hope I never have to open them again. However, even knowing all these advanced tools and softwares, over 90% of my visualizations are made in Microsoft Office. And it's because that's what my team uses, that's what our clients have access to. Microsoft Office, although limited, has a lot of capabilities in creating data visuals. It links to the charts. So if your clients update their data, I can just update everything and then my visuals updated. It links to the PowerPoints. So while it might not be the most creative tool, it is one of the most collaborative. So hopefully this breakdown represents a lot of you, and this is what I based today's talk off of. So let's get back to basics. So in 2022, Gianni Guglielmi and I got to speak at the LCA Institute, and we actually did a much more intensive survey asking LCA practitioners what visuals they use for LCA results. Now, instead of reiterating the results of this guidance document, which is available on Earthshift's website, I decided I'm going to use more of my experience to answer the question, what chart should I use today? And then if you want to compare it with other LCA practitioners, please reference this document. But okay, so what chart should I use? This is a big decision when you first get your table and you insert your chart and you're thinking. For pinpointing hotspots, first off, the bar chart answers all these questions usually, but I love a heat map. I love in Excel that you can do conditional formatting and you can create heat maps. For hotspots specifically, there's visual cues, the red, or if you're using a different color, the visual cue is so clear. But what I also love about heat maps is you can actually have the data there still. So in Excel, you can have all of your numbers and then you can color them accordingly. So then the data's there, but also a visual cue. Bar charts again are the most common. I also really like a tree map, and I like a tree map because like the heat map, you can have this visual cue, but then you can write the data in. So each one of these squares has space that you can take advantage of and put some data in. I do not like pie charts, but I did realize I used a few in some subsequent slides. I prefer a donut chart because the human eye can estimate a rectangle better than they can a wedge. So I prefer a donut if you are going to do this. Making comparisons, I definitely recommend a violin because the uncertainty is really important. However, again, that heat map, you can have all of the values there. And with that visual cue, it's easier to make comparisons. And then a stacked bar. As long as you're using one impact category, I like a relative to the highest. I think it's easier to compare. If you're using multiple impact categories, you have to use the 100% or separate axes. And then finally, handling uncertainty. Again, you may see the heat map. I really like them. I like that the data is there. The tree map, again, you can put an uncertainty range. You can type it out. There's a lot of room for data on these two. And the violin plot, again, we have this uncertainty visible. I have not gotten a chance to use this chart. I think you would have to code it or do some graphic design work. But Tensa et al. 2021, they have a whole paper on this blur chart, and it's a little controversial because if I'm remembering correctly from the paper, people didn't like it. However, they interpreted it accurately. So the uncertainty made people uncomfortable, but the whole point was this chart forces you to recognize the uncertainty. So these are all options for handling uncertainty, but I also like to take into consideration the following three things. So audience, context, and accessibility. So again, although people were interpreting this accurately, they didn't like it. And it's something to consider in your audience. I have a partner who does not do anything scientific. And so if I'm creating a chart that feels a little sciency, I like to run it by them because then I know if it's interpretable by the general public. And if something is scary, he will tell me that he would just skip over it in a paper. Sometimes he sees charts and he just skips over them. So that's something to consider. While this chart might show the uncertainty better, are people going to engage and interact with it? That's really important when it comes to presenting to the public. If you're presenting to scientists, that's less important because they're there for the data. Context is also important if you're casually presenting to your peers in-house. Your graphs don't need to be as sophisticated compared to if you're presenting to stakeholders or we help some companies present to stakeholders, in which case I really focus on their branding colors and their aesthetic, whereas when I'm presenting maybe in-house to my team, I might focus more on high contrast or accessibility or our branding. And then ending with accessibility, public and government figures, I would prioritize accessibility. But again, if you're working with a client who prioritizes their branding, you might have to try and balance that. Okay, we're going to move into Microsoft Office tips and tricks now. The first thing I would like you all to do when you log off this call is install Bright Slide. It imports, so I used to force myself to use Adobe Illustrator to make visuals because it felt more design-like. Brightside brings in almost all of the tools I used to use in Adobe Illustrator into PowerPoint. And I have this little demo. My ACLCA friends, you've already seen this demo. But so essentially, I'm going to show you how to make a custom icon. And again, I would have gone to Adobe Illustrator in the past, but I learned about the Brightside plugin at the Adobe conference. And so Microsoft has all of these fun icons, but sometimes they're not custom to what you're doing. And if you're using an icon, it's really important that it completely describes what you're doing because if you don't want it to cause confusion. If it's causing confusion, then you should just write it out. And so the first thing you can do is you can actually convert these to shapes. Okay, and then you can go into shape format and you can edit points. And again, this is something I used to go into Adobe Illustrator to do, but now I'm doing graphic design work right here. I'm editing the points. I'm making this little cat eye sunglasses for this icon. But the whole point of me doing this here is to show you you can actually make these graphic design edits here. All right, I'm going to fast forward a little bit because it took me a minute. The next thing I want to show you, or making a scientist, so I'm inserting a beaker. We have a flask. Again, this is a nice icon, but now I can custom edit it. I can move the bubbles to be going towards his eye. Glad he has glasses on. But so this is an idea of how you can take what's already made or just make your own, but you can make it more applicable to what you're doing. Okay, this is important over here. So let me show you. This is your selection pane. So if you're trying to make an icon, what you don't want is 20 layers here. And I'm sure I've been there often where I'm trying to click on something that's under a ton of different layers. Instead of being frustrated, you can open up this selection pane in PowerPoint and you can actually click on the object and then it's highlighted. Another thing you can do here, I'm going to pause, is there's 5 different features that are in PowerPoint. And this isn't even Brightside, this is right in PowerPoint. You can union, combine, fragment, intersect, subtract. These are all Adobe features and other graphic design tool features that you can do. And here I'm going to show you, I just clicked fragment, I can delete, and now there is, boop, boop, come on. Now there is a sunglasses shaped hole in this head, right? And now the last thing I want to show you is again, when you're making an icon, you want it to be one flat object. Right now, I think I have like 20 or 10 here, right? You can go in and again, go back to those shape tools. You can hit unite or union, and now you have one object. So this is really nice if you want to make custom icons and a number of other graphic design items. Now we're gonna get into Brightside, okay? So now I have all these funky scientists, but I want them to match. So this is Brightside, I want them to match to last, so I'm gonna highlight them all. The last one I select will be the one that I want them to match to. Boom, yay, now they all match. You can align them, you can distribute them, and now you have all these icons that are perfectly in a row. No more dragging and trying to align things. You can use Brightside. And then the last thing I want to show you on this little quick demo are guides. Don't use the ruler, don't use the grid. You can make custom guides. See how I'm adjusting? I always have a guide under the title. I usually have a guide under the first line, and these go from slide to slide to ensure all of your content is lined up. Okay. When do you want to use custom icons? If you're making a chart, I wanted this to be a little more applicable because again, if it doesn't immediately convey what you're trying to say, just use text because otherwise it's more confusing. My beautiful Earthshift process, I wanted a results icon that more reflected the results that we show. If you don't care about icons and you think you're never going to use that, the fun part is charts in Microsoft Office are also objects and you can use Brightside. So the first thing I want you to show you is that you can make templates for your chart. So I have this ACLCA template from the conference, and when I click on it, this chart down here totally changes into the exact specifications. This one changes, and this one. So they all went from different formats to a vertical stacked bar in the exact color palette that I want. And now that you know how to use Brightside, you can probably guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to match the size, I'm going to align, and I'm going to distribute. And this is how I make some of those grids that you've seen. And now I'm going to be a perfectionist and I'm going to align everything, so we'll fast forward. But so you can apply all of this to charts. So now you have all these Microsoft Office tips. Let's talk about how we can make those grids and different visualizations in Microsoft Office. When I think about how I like to see things, my analysts know probably by now, I think about graphs like this. How many products are we comparing? How many subgroups in those products are we looking at? How many impact categories and then how many analyses we're doing? This is very typical, and as you can see, it leads to a lot of data points and different figures. And we've probably all read a report before that is big chart, page, over and over and over again. One thing to think about, we're going to get into accessibility soon. I think accessibility, people think high contrast, big font sizes, but the way you order things is also really important, especially to more cognitive disabilities. So it's important to think about how we're structuring these reports and how we're structuring the data visualizations. So for example, if you're dealing with multiple impact categories, instead of having page after page, you could create a grid like this. See, instead of, so this is grouping all of them, but when we think about a hierarchy, you can also group them like this. So again, when you have a report, something I really dislike is when you have multiple bar graphs, but they're actually breakdowns and there's no, besides in-text reference, there's no way to see that they're broken down. Here's an example, and you can have these as full-size figures after, but I really like to have some kind of meta hierarchy chart that shows you, for example, here's the product and here's the three parts, and now they're broken down. To me, it's confusing when I have these four back to back to back with no indication that it's a breakdown. Here's a more sophisticated version of that breakdown that I've used before in a report. I also like to use design objects like these little boxes to emphasize connection. So one piece that we worked on showed that a certain like impact category changed with a certain material, but they were also dealing with a ton of products and a ton of facilities. And so using this lightly shaded box and orienting things on top of each other, the connection is very clear. Whereas before, when these two were separate and facilities was not organized like this, the connection was not as clear. Again, I use these boxes for emphasis. You don't need to color this orange. In fact, it can be blue because they're all labeled. However, when the baseline is orange, it makes it so clear that there's something different about the baseline. And then I like this orange box behind it because instead of trying to use my eyes and my brain to guess the space, I can look at it right here. So each bar I can compare to the baseline. A line does this too. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is disproportionate data. I feel like we've all been here where you hit graph and you have one super impactful thing and a bunch of little ones. And I think the knee-jerk reaction is to use two axes, which research suggests you shouldn't, but I don't mind it as long as you're making it super clear which axis goes to which bit of data. You can also use an axis break. I've used them. I don't hate them. If you're going to use an axis break, add a data label. The problem with these two charts is that you're telling your audience that the difference between here and here doesn't matter. Because what I'm looking at, this isn't the real difference, right? Because we have two axes, and this isn't the real difference because there's a break. If that difference is important and you want to share that, we can use something like this. So a chart like this shows that, we have this super impactful part. Wow, teal is bigger than green. However, green, there's a lot of difference in these little parts. And let me use a more realistic example, more sophisticated chart. You can use a subset like this, right? So when you're looking at this pie chart, I can't with my eye tell the difference between, dark green and light orange. But here I see that it's actually like a significant difference, it seems like. Or you can use a tree map. And the nice thing about a tree map is you could fit a ton in this space. So just thinking about, and again, this is in Microsoft Office, they're all linked. These are just lines that I inserted. The last thing I want to add for Microsoft Office that I don't have time to go through today is this billion-dollar graphics. I'm not going to talk about smart art today, but I think it's really important. And Mike Parkinson has this website that I use for inspiration. He created all of these in Microsoft PowerPoint, so you can too. But I go here for inspiration, and I specifically like how he categorizes it by problem. So like cause and effect or comparison. So that's linked here. I really like this site. All right, let's get into accessibility. So why does accessibility matter in data visualization? I think it's important to even go back to why does data visualization matter? And it's because we want to influence people and create change. It's the nature of our work. And in order to do that, we need people to engage with our work. Unfortunately, we need it to be noticeable. We want it to stand out. And then to take that a step further, we want everyone to be able to engage with our work. And that's where accessibility comes in. I really like this quote from the ADA. Um, an inaccessible website can exclude people just as much as steps at an entrance to a physical location. So I'd never thought about it that way, but then what's also funny about this quote is there's no ADA mandate on websites or PowerPoints, etc. Only recommendations and best practices. So I think this is a funny quote because I'm sure there's set mandates and blueprints if you're building a staircase, but when it comes to some online content, it can be difficult. And so here are at the bottom here, we have we have the WCAG, National Disabilities Network, ADA, and the Perkins School for the Blind. These are some sources I pulled from that have some best practices. But again, there's no mandate right now because it's constantly evolving. So let's talk about color first. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind when people think accessibility. And so something I've been trying to do for like the last 2 years is create this 20 color accessible palette. I have tried a ton of combinations and still to this day I cannot find the perfect palette that has a 3-to-1 contrast with the background and neighboring colors all the time. And so as I was prepping these slides, I thought, let's ask AI. So I asked AI, we have the 3-to-1 contrast ratio, which the WCAG recommends, and I put in my branding colors because I love Earthshift's colors. And they gave me not the prettiest bar graph. And it's not just not the prettiest, not all of these have that 3-to-1 contrast ratio. And I tried a few iterations of this. In addition, some of these I can't. I'm very color sensitive and I struggle to tell apart with my naked eye the difference between these. So again, there's no mandate, and I even like a robot or AI, whatever you think it is, couldn't give me a set answer. So I'm going to share with you what I do in my experience, what I found out of work. I do want to preface I'm not an accessibility expert, but this has worked with our team and clients. I like this 3-color system where you go dark, medium, light, um, and always have a legend in the same orientation as the chart that you're using. You don't want to use color alone to convey information. You need like a two-factor system. And I like this because I simulated different vision impairments. And while there's some colors that look the same, right? Like these yellows, what I like about it is the dark, medium, light, you can match it up with the legend. So it should be easy to see. Now, if some of these are super small and you can't see them, that's where there's challenges. But I recommend if you can't see something on a chart, don't include it in the chart. You put a note at the bottom and say, this is XYZ. So this works most of the time. AI's version does not work with this full black and white version. At least for me, I can't tell the difference between some of them. So again, you want to avoid using color alone to convey information. I like the orientation and the legend. A lot of research suggests texture and pattern. I really dislike this. I think it feels overwhelming. And also the legend is really hard to tell, but certain cases you can use texture and pattern, and maybe with less groups it would look better. I think this has the problem with this is you can't, as far as I know, do it in Microsoft besides manually. So I had to go in and add all of these figures. However, symbols research suggests is a really good second factor for that system. But when you can, just add the label. And that's for anything. When you can add text that explicitly tells you what's going on, add the label. Only use icons and symbols and texture and color if you can't have text there. Speaking of text, let's get into accessible and aesthetic text. So the first thing, and this is also Microsoft Office, use PowerPoint templates. Right now we're talking about text and specifically screen readers. PowerPoint templates are already set up so that a screen reader can parse through the title, the text box. When you hit insert text box, unless you go into the selection pane and fix it, it can really confuse the screen reader. In addition, use alternative text for images and charts. You can even have it generate alternative text for you. You also should mark things as decorative. For example, the Earthshift logo or this colorful bar over here. It would be super annoying if every time you came on it said beautiful gradient bar on the left, gradient logo on the right. You want to mark things that aren't critical but are more for visual interest as decorative. Another thing that I personally am not good at, but I'm working on now, that I know it's not good for screen readers, is using animation to go from point to point. One, it doesn't change the page number. I am guilty of liking to do slide 1, 2, 3 instead of animation. So I would have had this bullet point and then slide 2 have 2 bullet points, slide 3 have 3. This is a nightmare for screen readers because you're repeating the title, then they're repeating the first point. Just use animations. It's really easy. It just wasn't a habit. A lot of this stuff isn't a habit, and I think that's what it comes down to. If you make it a habit, it's pretty easy. There is no set font size. Here are some recommendations that I found again from the bottom 4 groups. We use Calibri, use a sans serif font. Font color, you need that 3:1 ratio, for example, for a title, and then a 4.5:1 ratio for text. I'm going to show you a tool on how to check your contrast ratio. We don't really embed videos into our slides, but if you do, you should have captions on them. And then the last thing I want to talk about on this slide is high quality format. So I don't personally buy into the font size too much because I have my monitor in front of me. So a 16 is actually a 24, and you might be watching from your cell phone. So my 16 might be like a 7. Someone might be on an iPad. So the font size is kind of relative to the device you're using. Instead, I encourage you, and I focus on this, using high quality format like PDF, SVG. You want to be able to zoom in on things. I have, parents that are getting older. Everything they do, they're zooming. The font size doesn't matter as much as if you can zoom in and it can be accessible, especially if you're exporting as a PDF. And that's why I like those grids. There's a small figure, but then you can zoom in and it becomes full size. Some tools and resources. Microsoft Office already has a check accessibility. There were a ton of errors on my PowerPoint that I needed to look into. Again, like missing a slide title, duplicating a slide title, etc. You can run this accessibility check. You can also inspect your slides without color. Bright Slide, which I know you're all ready to download, has this easy. You click 2 objects, you right click, and it gives you that contrast ratio right away. This helps me all the time it's so easy to check. Figma or the Pilestone that I showed you has a vision simulator. There's also screen reader simulators. But my 3 biggest pieces of advice, in addition to all those tools, Microsoft can do a lot of it for you. So just ensure you can zoom in. Microsoft, all this text is already vector format. Um, Optimize screen reader compatibility. Again, use a PowerPoint template and it's already got you 90% there. And then lastly, provide data tables when you can. I had a professor in college who had some color vision issues, and he would always say like, "Oh, your figure looks great. Where's the data table?" Because he found it really difficult to distinguish between different colors. So while it might not seem fair and it's unfortunate, it is accessible, and you can this way everyone can access your data even if they can't understand the figure or access the figure. And again, I'm not an accessibility expert. This is my experience. And prioritizing accessibility means ongoing improvement. Technology is updating all the time. So this is going to change all the time. So it's something, my first year at Earthshift, I really focused on aesthetic. We have such a beautiful brand. I wanted it to look beautiful. My second year, I focused on efficiency, getting my systems, finding things I did manually. This year, I'd really like to focus on accessibility. And I think Microsoft Office really helps with that if we use their templates. All right, so this last section, we're going to get into visualization innovation. Again, this was really highly rated from ACLCI, so sorry if you went to that, but maybe you'll pick up something new. I'm really inspired by Frederica Fragapane. I got to take 2 online courses with her, and she just has incredible data visualization skills. And one thing I really learned from her is that she makes every single design object mean something. So the weight of this line, the length of this line, the location of this line, everything is a data point. And so I started reflecting a few months ago on how can we do this in our field? Because we have so much data. We're not lacking for data. How can we also do this? And so I came up with this idea, again, pie charts, even though I said I didn't like them. Um, we know that the wedge means something, the size of the wedge, but could the size of the circle, could that area mean something? Could the location on this plot mean something? And then can we pair it with uncertainty somehow? Do we want to do a plot like this, or do we want to do something more cumulative? Do we want to show over time how this is impacting? So just some ideas I haven't fully hashed out, but I think there's potential here to really add on these layers because again, we're not lacking for data. Up until now, everything could be done in Microsoft Office, and I believe most things can. However, I really like this tool. It's called Raw Graphs. You can see all these beautiful, beautiful plots. Very user friendly. You drag and drop. You do need tidy data, but not the most beautiful colors, but I'll show you how to get around that. But my favorite part about this is you can export as an SVG. And an SVG means when you bring it into PowerPoint, right? I brought this in. You can click on group and you can actually select. Let's see, actually, I can show you. You can actually select this as a circle. Oh, there it is. So now it's a shape and it's a shape we can play with. And then we can create fun things like this. And this is linked, but the rest of it isn't. So you will have to rerun that. But this idea of now we have all these fun graphics from Raw Graphs, which is free and easy to use, and now you can bring it in and tie it in with some Microsoft Office visuals. It's been really fun to play around with, and I think there's a really good potential for us to create some great graphics using it. And we can add more. So I really like this idea. You can do alluvial and Sankey diagrams. And again, the colors are not that nice, but each one of these is an object. So I clicked each one individually and made it the color that I wanted. So now it's pretty, it's informative, it's fun. The last thing I want to show you is this idea of using 3D objects in Microsoft PowerPoint. So I don't know if you've seen this before. There's this 3D model, but there's a ton of stock. If you are an educator, there are a lot of diagrams, dioramas, geology. You can see them like a ton of stuff for educational purposes. Today, I'm going to use a set of headphones just because it's an easy product to look at. You hit insert. And then let's see, you can spin it around. So the first thing, make sure you put morph feature. You need this morph transition here. And then let's see, do I spin it around for you? Nope, I'm gonna show you real quick. So when you insert this object, like here, you can actually spin it around because it's a 3D model. And then when you add in that morph transition, we can see it move like this. And now this has, I think, the potential to really impress some clients. You can move around a diagram as you're highlighting what stage of the life cycle you're at or what part you're looking at. And it's so easy. And so while Microsoft is limited, some of your clients or companies you're working with might have their own 3D objects. And yeah, I hope it's looking good for everybody. If your Wi-Fi is not great, it might not, but in person, it definitely looks really good. So it's a fun feature. All right, I'm going to recap what we've talked about, and then I want to talk about some upcoming opportunities. So we went through some simple data viz tips, and then I went through Microsoft Office. We talked about some basic essentials of accessibility. And again, I'm not an expert, it's more my experience that I've been working with. And then the visualization ideas I have. Right now, I'm working on custom training and workshops. And so I'm hoping to tackle things like hands on graphic design demos, data set to visualization. So exporting, tidying up your data sets, importing it back into whatever software you're using or using Microsoft Office, case studies and real world applications, breaking down my visualization process and my organization tips, and then tools beyond Microsoft Office. I know how to use Tableau and I know how to use ggplot and R, but that would take an entire workshop. It could not be addressed today. And then lastly, I think at least for most of the people interacted with the ECLCA, I think something that would be super beneficial is if you can create a PowerPoint template with chart templates and an Excel template, then it's automated. then you can just be pasting your data and everything. You only have to do it once. And so focusing on automation, I've been doing it at Earthshift. I think it's really important. So I'm working on some custom training, but if you have other topics in mind, please reach out via LinkedIn or email. And my email's coming up. But I really like this quote. I always end with it that science isn't finished until it's communicated. But I would like to take it a step further. Science isn't finished until it's understood. Again, the nature of our work is that we want to make an impact. Our work needs to be understood in order to do so, and it needs to be accessible. And maybe this quote should be changed to science isn't finished until it's understood and accessible. But I hope you learned something today. I left a lot of time for questions, and thank you so much for your time. And I am ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Tess. And we have several questions that have poured in. To start, first question, are you recommending adding tables to the slides or providing data tables after a presentation?
So it depends on the format that you're giving it in. Like, for example, for today, you're all not getting access to my slides. So then it would make sense for me to show a table. But if people are getting access to your slides or it's a report, I do prefer tables in the appendix, tables after your conclusion, so that those who need to access them have access to them. But again, I think something to consider is that accessibility is also the hierarchy in which you're presenting things in the order. So the simpler you can make a presentation and then have all of that accessible, that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Tess. Next question. Do the accessibility alternate text work when exporting to PDFs?
That's a great question. So I have not used the alternative text. It's something I just learned about. And again, this next year, I'm going to be implementing into our own templates. I don't know. That's something I'll have to look into. I would imagine it does. If it doesn't, then I imagine that PDF has a way for you to add alternative text. It might be a little clunky to do that. Adobe and Microsoft don't always like to work hand in hand. It would be nice if they did, but that would be my assumption. But if you want to drop your email, I can look into it and get back to you.
What was the tool that you used for the graphs?
The raw graphs, let me go. These charts, I'm assuming, because otherwise it was all PowerPoint. Oh, you know what? We're gonna hit escape. There we go. Here's the link. I'm assuming it's this one. Otherwise, it's all in PowerPoint.
Thank you. How do you balance aesthetic appeal with the need for precise data representation in LCA visualizations?
That's a good question. So I think if we go back to the audience and context, let me scroll back up to that slide so we can look at it together. That is what I primarily think about. So audience, context, and accessibility. If you have and this happens, sometimes we have clients that are very technical, in which case I almost am always doing a heat map because that data is there. If you are going towards the public, or for example, I'm working on an infographic right now where space is limited, you want to look at the main message. And my analysts know I say this a lot. What are you trying to communicate? What's the main takeaway? Because when you have limited space, you want to communicate that point. And then again, if you can, and even if it's an infographic, you could say access data here. I think that's the biggest part for me because we don't want to mislead people, but you are the scientist, you are the one who knows the data, and so you can communicate the message and you don't have to show all the data. And in fact, sometimes showing all of the data is confusing and then your message doesn't get across. But I do think all the data should be accessible somewhere.
Thanks, Tess. Next question, do you have any tips or tricks on benchmarking data from different sources? So how to visually show that there may be different boundaries, geographies, or impacts included?
I don't know. I feel like I don't totally understand the question. Like comparing different geographies. Let me see. Can I open the chat too? I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe, oh, Q&A. Maybe that'll be helpful. Oh, I see it. Well, so when it comes to system boundaries, which I didn't talk about at all today, I think that's where system boundary diagrams can really play a role. And so I just made one of my first maps. I don't get to make maps as much in this line of work. But if you have your system diagram and then you color code it like certain way, when you get into the results, you want to maintain that color scheme so that, okay, if something's out of boundary and it's gray up here, keep it gray moving forward and you can put a note. I think that anytime you are worried about people understanding the connection, that's where that extra text can come in. I hope that answered it. I'm not sure I totally understood it, but
Well, we have your email
yes.
address, so people are
Let me go
encouraged
back
to
to
reach
that.
out to you for additional clarification. Let's put that slide back up for people.
Perfect.
Okay, next question. Any tips or tricks for showing sensitivity analysis results in a digestible manner?
I almost always do sensitivity analysis as a stacked bar. I actually was just working on one today. I think that, again, when it comes to the sensitivity analysis, a bar chart totally works. You want to because sensitivity analysis is not a common analysis. Not everyone knows what it is. So I recommend putting exactly what you're doing, exactly the components of the sensitivity analysis right next to it. But yeah, I usually use a bar chart, not a stack, like a right next to each other so you can compare them.
Great. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on using interactive dashboards or web-based platforms for LCA data visualization compared to static reports?
I love interactive dashboards. I think they're fun. I think they're a little more time intensive, and I think that not everyone has access to them. So I think that's the hardest part for me. A PDF is easy because you can be on your cell phone and you can click at it and then it's there. I don't even know what Tableau looks like on a cell phone. I don't know how Tableau works if you don't have access to it. When you can make it interactive, because on one hand, interactivity is more accessible because you can break it down and you can have all the data there. What I like about Microsoft Office is when you click on a chart and highlight, the data comes up, that little tooltip comes up. And that's what I like most about interactive dashboards too. So if you're having trouble seeing the color and then you hover your mouse, you can get all the data. So I think there's a lot of potential for accessible design, so long as it's accessible, maybe color vision wise. Is it accessible to everyone financially? Do you have to pay for them? So, and the time it puts into it too.
Okay, great. So you talked about the heat map as a type of visualization that you use for your technical stakeholders. What type of visualizations do you think are most effective for simplifying the complex LCA data for non-technical stakeholders?
I love a pictorial. And let me go up. This is from our guidance document. If you have any questions about any of these charts, they're all explained in detail and when I would use them. I love a pictorial. It's difficult because you can't convey as much, but they're really fun to look at. So for example, we might look at we'll do the greenhouse gas equivalencies, for example, like gallons of gas. This many gallons of gas is this impact. And then I'll use a little car icon and duplicate it a few times. And I think what's fun about that is everyone can count cars for the most part. It's engaging and it's relative, like it relates it to you. It also isn't intimidating. People are scared of graphs. People are scared of Excel. I have learned that. When you use a pictorial, so especially when I make an infographic, which I'm working on now, I almost always start with something fun and pictorial like. And then I'll make the scarier graphs kind of towards the bottom. So then you're like reeling people in, they're excited, and then they'll get through the graphs. But that's something to consider. I like a pictorial. And then, unfortunately, the donut. Everyone loves pie and donut charts more than a tree map, even though tree maps I think are better. So kind of thinking about the graphs that you made first in like third grade when you got on a computer, those are the charts we should use. The ones that are more advanced, like I didn't learn about a violin plot until I started working for Earthshift. So it's the last plot I would probably use with the general public. Thinking about those basic charts that you learned when you learned Excel, that's what I would use.
Thank you. Do you know any specific trends or emerging AI tools that could shape future practices in LCA visualization?
So that is also on my year. So I'm focusing on accessibility and AI this year. One thing that I got to see demoed at an Adobe conference is Microsoft Copilot. I'm really excited about it. Um, I think they're still doing some work on confidentiality. So obviously that's a big issue. Not issue. It's really important to us at Earthshift confidentiality. But once they decide how they're going to market and get Copilot out, and again, maybe it already is. I haven't gotten to look into it yet. That for accessibility, it listens to you present. It can look over your data visualizations, let you know what's high contrast. So I think AI is going to play a role. All this stuff you watched me do manually, I think AI is going to play a role. And I think eventually, hopefully, they can give me a 20 color palette that's like a 3-to-1 ratio. Right now, they can't. But I think those kind of things. But otherwise, I don't know. I like to believe that the creative side of my job, AI could never do. I know that's probably not true. But I'll keep updating myself and everybody on where AI is going.
Thank you, Tess. So those are all the questions that we have right now. I want to encourage everybody to reach out and find the guidance document, which has a lot more information, and also keep an eye open for upcoming courses and other resources that Tess will be developing. And please reach out to her if you have additional questions or suggestions or feedback. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Tess, for your contributions to LCA and data visualization and moving this all forward.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Looking forward to moving us all forward.